Welcome back, Richard. It's good to see you.
Hey, it's good to see you. We had a
different
week off, right?
studio. You're in a different room, different place.
Yeah, I had to relocate this morning for some unforeseen circumstances, but here I am and missed you last week.
Yes, you were away. You were out of town, out of state,
Out of the state, taking a everybody tells me it's a much needed vacation. I'm not sure what they mean by that, but I suspect the rest of the world knew that I needed a vacation, even if I didn't.
That's right. That's right.
I shudder to think of what it was like before the vacation. So, but, yeah, I'm back and everything's good. How are you doing? You're okay?
I'm doing all right, and
Life is good.
Eager to talk about this, discuss this topipic today. On
yeah, it's another thing.
Indistractable.
Another thing we stumbled upon. That I hadn't really seen. The person who developed this concept has another book called Hooked, which I had seen. I knew about Hooked. I haven't read it, but I knew about the concept. And so, but this idea, I really hadn't. I didn't know about it before. But then I stumbled on this article called "Can Someone with ADHD Be Indistractable?" And I thought, indistractable. Mm-hmm. What is indistractable? You and I have done a little bit of work with ADHD over the years. I think between the two of us, we've probably seen thousands of people with ADHD. Mm-hmm. So, and you and I know it from we understand it from full disclosure, right?
Right.
And I thought, I wonder what, but I said, I wonder what he means by indistractable.
Right.
Interesting concept. Does it mean that he'll make you less distractible? Does it mean that and what does he mean by distracted? Distracted from what? Is it, we all know about people looking at you're talking to somebody and all of a sudden you're in a conversation and their phone buzzes or their Apple Watch buzzes and they're distracted and they move to that. They move away from your conversation and to the device. Or people talk to us, they'll say, well, I started cleaning, I did what you said. I went and started to clean my garage, and before I knew it, I was weeding the garden, or I was running the vacuum cleaner, and all of a sudden I was doing laundry. And so we meet with people all the time who talk about that. So I wasn't sure exactly what he meant by this concept of indistractable.
Yeah, and what's interesting is there's a whole area, a whole I guess little niche of people who are talking about these kinds of things. Because as I was looking more into it, I came across a TEDx video of a woman presenting on just to stop following your passion.
To stop following your passion.
To stop following your passion. And it was it was sort of the whole idea of becoming too focused on something that we're not focused on. It was a very interesting concept. So yes, it's an interesting area that a lot of people are talking about, and it certainly seems worth some time to talk about because the author Nir Eyal, as you said, he has a book out called Indistractable: How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life, and in the book he talks about how do we manage distractions.
Right. And I wondered what kind of distraction he meant, but then as you delve into it, as you read the article and read the book, he said the central premise of this concept is that if you're not equipped to manage the distractions, you're going to be manipulated into time-wasting activities, time-wasting distractions. And he actually says your brain will be manipulated. It will just go to those places. And it made me think of TV executives back in the 50s and 60s, and probably into the 70s. The goal of TV executives was to keep people watching the TV. That's
Absolutely.
what everybody wanted to do. You wanted to keep people watching because they had to be in front of the screen in order to see the commercials. It
Right.
wasn't so the programming was made interesting so that people would watch the commercials. And,
Right.
and anybody who watches TV knows that you get these cliffhangers and then stay tuned and then you have a commercial. Well, you're not going to leave because you want to find out what happens in the next segment. Okay. And it began to dawn on people. We studied TV when I was in graduate school. There was one of our professors had a particular interest in it. And he said, it's not products that are sold, it's people, it's viewers. What's being sold is you, the viewer. And I couldn't help myself. I was distracted for a moment because I thought the Super Bowl is one of the most watched programs in our country. It's 112 million people watched it. And everybody talks about the Super Bowl ads. Well, it cost $6.5 million to build to have a 30-second ad. Just $217,000 per second that it costs. By contrast, Saturday Night Live, it's a fairly popular program. It has about 6 million viewers, and it costs about 300,000 compared to 6.5 million for a 30-second spot. And then I read a little bit more, and you'll appreciate this. You were very impressed that the Super Bowl has 112 million viewers.
Mm-hmm.
You know what the World Cup viewer audience is?
A lot more than that.
31 billion with a B.
Right.
It's half the world's population, just about.
Mm-hmm.
It's a portion of the world's population that watches the World Cup.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no idea. You did, right? You knew that.
Right. Yeah. No. There are a few tournaments like that garner tremendous attention from all over the world.
You know, we happened to be in another country when in the summertime when the World Cup was on, and it was a South American country. Everything stopped when that match was on. People just congregated to places where there was a TV, and then I said, "Oh, okay, that's why 31 billion people. It's all over the world." You know?
Yeah,
and,
but you know, the whole idea, as you were talking about with TV and with ads, the whole idea is to keep you engaged. And we know that there are the industry, various industries have that focus. You know, social media. We've talked before on the podcast about how social media is designed to keep you engaged. Video games. We did a podcast before on the the work that's being done at Stanford University, where they're building games, but the idea is to look at how addictive they can make them.
That's
where people get stuck in, and that's why achievements and different things are built into the games to keep you engaged in such a way that you don't leave it.
I don't remember when Facebook first came. Do you know when Facebook came out? I don't know the year that it was.
I don't remember.
But people were adopting it. You know, they were the early adopters, and then some people came later. And I was working with a woman. She was a few years older than I was, so she was really new to all of this. And she came in one morning and she said, "Richard, I get it now. I understand." She said, "I got on Facebook last night," and she said 4 hours went by.
Yeah.
And I have no idea where the time went. She said, "I can see now why people," and she was a psychologist by training, and but new to Facebook, new to the internet. And she said, "I can see now why people talk about just losing themselves." She said, she didn't call it rabbit holes. She didn't have the vocabulary to say you go down these rabbit holes, but she said, you just go deeper and deeper. And she said, I was looking up, and she was probably in her 60s at the time. And she said, I was going back to high school classmates, and she said she was astonished with how quickly the time went by.
Right. Yeah. And for some of these reasons, like the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual from the American Psychiatric Association, they're they've identified internet gaming disorder
Right.
as sort of a condition for further exploration and
Mhm.
further study. And you know, again, we've kind of talked on the podcast before about our perspective of addiction
Right.
and that kind of thing. But there are many attributes of the way that we get hooked into some of these things that do closely resemble an addiction. But it's you know, it's difficult because these media are designed to keep you engaged, to keep you attending to it. And part of that is because of often creating short-term goals
Right.
that are achievable, but also there's constant change. And you know, that's the thing with the ads, right? Is that there's the anticipation of something enjoyable, but then they change. Ads are only 30 seconds. And so
Right.
if you're getting something new every 30 seconds, then it keeps you engaged.
Right. That's right. And so we all know, we know now that these things are built to be so we don't have to use the word addiction,
Right.
but they're made to be attractive or
Right.
appealing or compelling. And you don't, it's not true addiction in the classic sense of the word.
Right.
One writer pointed out that video games take skill, they take cognitive engagement and skill, dexterity, whereas gambling is just sort of luck. And there's really no money involved in video games. There
Right.
isn't that kind of gain. So it doesn't fit the classic addiction model that we typically think of, but we all know that it's very attractive, very appealing,
Yeah.
and people will spend a lot of time on social media and gaming, that sort of thing.
Right.
So we thought, okay, so let's take a closer look at this concept, Eyal's concept of indistractable. One of the things I like about the concept is that being indistractable means that you're striving toward. It doesn't. You're going to. It's like a skill. It's like a motor skill.
Mhm.
You have to work to get better at it. It's not
Right.
it's not some package deal where you say, okay, if I do this, I'm indistractable. It's a striving to do what you want to do, how you want to live your life. It's striving to do what you say you're going to do, even if you're saying it to yourself. You know,
Right.
like I want to be good at fill in the blank, whatever it is.
Right.
And it is being indistractable is staying on that message and doing what you need to do to achieve that goal. Now, there's more to it than that, but it's a process, not just a static strategy.
Right. And so what that sort of suggests is that you know what you value, you know what you're working toward,
That's right.
and you're actively doing things, intentionally doing things
Right.
to work in that direction, to move towards that goal or that value.
That's right.
But it requires a little bit of organization, of course.
That's right.
And that's where I think a lot of people may have a little bit of difficulty, because you have to organize your life in a way that requires that forethought. You have to anticipate it and prepare for it.
Right. And that's right. And so in being indistractable has these two organizing components. One is your values. What is it that you value? And when we talk about ADHD a little later in the podcast, because this is a little more difficult with people with ADHD, because by definition they're distractible.
Right.
Okay. But it begins with your values. What do you value? And this is one of the things I really like about the concept is it begins with what you value. And then how do you organize your life around that value system? Okay. And so by organizing your life, there's three key concepts here. One is organizing your life takes planning and forethought.
Right.
You know, but this is we're in the summer here in our hemisphere, and this is when people typically go on vacation.
Right.
Well, you know, most people spend more time planning a vacation than they do planning their lives. I mean, we know
Right.
that people will spend hours and days planning and packing and preparing. far more than they spend planning their lives.
Right.
Okay. In order to organize your life, you have to control your attention. That's a tall order for somebody with ADHD. I understand that. But you have to control your attention so that you stay on that path, whatever path you've set for yourself.
Right.
Because if you are constantly distracted, you're constantly being removed. You're constantly, you're encountering all these obstacles to achieving the life that you want to achieve, not just achieving short-term goals,
Right.
but living the life that you really want to live. Okay.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I like about this is that you're choosing. It made me think of William Glasser and his choice theory, where you're deciding what kind of a life you want to live, and that you have agency, that you are in control, but you have to manage the distractions. Otherwise, you're not going to live the life that you really want to live. And if you don't, that could lead to all kinds of problems.
Absolutely. So when you take all these together, the premise begins with this idea that you have to have some direction, sort of have some ideas to where you're going, what your values are, so that you can, and once you have the idea of what your values are, then you can sort of imagine or plan for this life that you want to live. And you can look, kind of create a path, and see the steps that you need to take to work in that direction. And that then is where your attention is focused.
Right.
And it reminds me of, the idea of developing motivation.
Right.
You develop motivation through success, through achievement.
Right.
And so if you know which direction you want to go, if you know what your values are and where you're wanting to go, each step you take in that direction is likely to provide you more motivation to keep going in that direction, because you're making achievements, you're working, and you're finding progress and those kinds of things. If you're on a diet, there's nothing more motivating than seeing the scale go down. And so as soon as you achieve a little bit, then you start to find more motivation to achieve more.
Right. And when you can finally get into that pair of pants that you haven't been able to button, your COVID pants, that you haven't been able to button because you gained 15 pounds, or the freshman 15. Right.
Yeah.
So in the book that he wrote, he talks at length about the 4 things you have to do to control your attention. Okay.
Right.
And we don't want to spend too much time talking about that, but he said there's 4 things you have to do. You have to expand. And I think, first of all, you have to identify, what are your internal triggers? What moves you toward your goal? Is it the scale? Is it the clothes you wear? Is it impressing other people? What are your internal triggers? What moves you toward your goal? And then you need to know those, and you need to expand on them so that your internal triggers are driving you. They're keeping you focused. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And what we're talking about, again, you can think of the way that at least I took them, is that idea of internal triggers. That's your motivation.
Right.
Those are the short-term goals, things that you're doing, those small steps that you can take towards that long-term goal that will propel you and drive you forward, to take the next step.
Right. And this is where this is where the forethought comes in. You got to think about this stuff. What's really, this is what we mean by values. What do you value? Okay.
Right.
The second thing is make time for traction. I like the concept of traction. That resonates with me for some reason.
Traction
it's the opposite of
distraction.
Distraction, right? And I never made that connection, but you want to get traction. Now, Freud said that there are 2 important things in life, and they're love and work. Eyal adds a third, and that is you. So he said there are 3 things that define us. One is work, one is yourself, and one is your relationship. So instead of love, it's relationships. And this is where your values reside, is on these 3 things. And I think he's absolutely right about that. Right. That when you start to organize your life, you're really organizing it around your work, your self-care, yourself, and your relationships. And those are the 3 organizing principles. And then, so the first one is you have your internal triggers. The second one is you define your values around these three key concepts. And then the third is you have to eliminate the external triggers,
Right.
the things that are getting in your way.
Right.
Okay? What are the things that are gaining access, most of all, to your time?
Right.
Okay.
And this is the thing I think that's one of the most difficult for people, because what that means is you have to get rid of some of those things that eat up your time.
Right.
Many times that's social media, or that's gaming, or that's other, electronics and different things that consume so much of our time. The example you gave earlier of the person who, shared that, 4 hours was gone so quickly.
Right.
When you are in a situation and you find that much time can disappear,
Right.
you can get a lot done in 4 hours.
Right. Well,
whether you're talking about work, or you're talking about your relationship, or you're talking about improving yourself, there's a lot that you can do in 4 hours.
That's right. If you're, there was a statistic that came out years ago that we often use, that the average teenager spends 5 hours a day on electronics, social media. Well, 5 hours is if you're in school, if it's during the school year, 5 hours is a big chunk of your day. Okay.
Yeah.
And so if that's where you're spending your time, what are you losing? Are you focused on your values, or are you focused on these 5 hours? And so, what are the external triggers that are getting in your way? We interviewed an exercise specialist a couple of years ago, and he said, the key is, what are you willing to give up to accomplish what you want to do? It's not just what you're going to do. It's what are you willing to give up? Is it TV? Is it
right? And that goes to Ayal's fourth piece to this, and that is preventing other distractions. That I think that same interviewee, he talked about wanting to work out at the gym and finding it difficult to come home from work and then getting everything ready and then going back to the gym. And so, what he would do is he would pack his gym bag the night before and take it with him to work to prevent the distraction of coming home and getting stuck at home, because it is really difficult to come home after a full day of work and then leave again to go work out. And so he would take everything with him and just go straight to the gym from work. And so this idea of preventing distractions, you have to have a system in place for it. You have to have steps and mechanisms set up to prevent those distractions.
Right. Yeah, I think, didn't he say that he would get home and just flop on the sofa and eat Hershey? I think it was Hershey Kisses or something.
Yeah, something like
some kind of chocolate, right? And so not only was he sedentary, but he was also adding calories, and that's what he had to stop doing. And so you're right, he would pack his gym bag and have it ready to go. So instead of going to the sofa, the gym bag was at the doorway or something. He left it at the door, and he would open the door, grab his gym bag, and leave, and he was ready to go. But again, it takes planning. And that's what Ayala is saying, is you got to think about this stuff and plan it. And so we know that it's more difficult today, because until the 1990s, there really weren't that many distractions. People had hobbies, they would spend time fiddling with hobbies. There was TV, but there wasn't much content. There weren't that many even you remember when there were only 3 stations, right? Yeah. And there was entertainment. People would go to concerts or movies, or go to parties. That teenagers would look forward to Friday and Saturday night so they could go out and do things. And there were other interests, but by and large, most of the distractions were much more manageable in those years. But today, the landscape is vastly different, and you can make a list of all the. I mean, you could just go Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, TikTok. I mean, it's a much more challenging today than it was even less than a generation ago.
Absolutely. And so, and not only, do you have the social media things, but then you have, again, as we talked about before, the things that are somewhat specifically designed to maintain your attention and to maintain your focus. And I think that because we live in a world that's so informed all the time, it has contributed to this idea of people just fearing that they're going to miss out on something.
Right. That's
So,
right.
you know, because we can know so much about what's going on, we want to know everything that's going on. And so
Right.
it's this weird, it's just this weird dynamic that has developed as the world has gotten smaller and we've gained more and more access to information.
Right.
Now we just want more and more information.
I have to stay informed. I
Yeah.
have to keep up. But my goodness, where does it stop? You know, because you want to keep up with world affairs. You want to keep up with the news. You want to keep up with.
Well, we did a couple of podcasts a few weeks ago on some of the mass shootings and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I have said many times on the podcast, I don't watch the news. I don't read the newspaper. I don't watch the news for a variety of reasons, but it's one of those things that you can just get sucked into and get stuck. And I had a couple of patients come in, this past week asking me if I had seen about, this person who, this person that was killed, or this person that was
Yeah.
that happened, a couple of towns over. I was like, no, I don't know anything about those things. And you really feel like, okay, maybe I should know these things. And, but
people will say, did you know that? And then they'll tell me something. And I have no idea what you're talking about.
Right.
And it's not that I'm not informed, but I'm just not interested in, I guess, Ben Affleck and what's her name? Jennifer Lopez got married. Right? So this is some big deal in that world, that they finally got married. And I didn't know much about that.
I thought they were married a long time ago. I don't know.
See what I mean? You're
yeah, but that's stuff that's not, it's just not important to me.
Well, I would come in often and say, well, I would say, well, did you see that Georgia won the national championship? And you just kind of shake your head very nice. You were very polite about it. You say, no, I missed that one.
Yeah.
And most of the country, at least the southeastern part of the country, is the world stops during the college football playoffs.
Yeah.
Your world doesn't change much during that time of year.
No, I think that happens, in December, January, somewhere around there. So
you're hopeless. So what Ayala is talking about here in his book is the concept of replacement theory. We want to replace distraction with traction. Okay. So the question becomes, can people with ADHD do this?
Right.
Now, that's what the article was about. Can someone with ADHD? And so I guess he interviewed an ADHD coach. Her name is Caitlin O'Brien Bauer. And he interviewed her during a podcast. And this article, Can Someone with ADHD Be Indistractable? This article is taken from notes from that podcast with her. And there were three takeaways, three messages from that interview.
Yeah.
One of them is, define yourself by your values, not your diagnosis. And that's really good advice. And I think that's something I'm going to start using with, especially my adult patients with ADHD, is we're going to spend some time talking about their values.
Well, it's good, not just for ADHD, but it's good for anything. And we often hear from patients, unfortunately, especially kids and teenagers, well, I couldn't help it because I have ADHD. I couldn't help it because I have this or I have that. And, you start defining and thereby limiting your world and your abilities based upon your diagnosis.
Right.
As opposed to saying, you know what, this is something that's really important to me. A good friend has often reminds me that we, when it's something that's important to us, we find the time for it. Right. And so it's sort of the same thing with what we're talking about here. If you have a value that's important to you, you're going to find the ability to attend to it. You're going to find the ability to put some focus on it because it's important to you. And those important things, we have motivation to move towards them.
Right. Because you take a typical 10 to 15, 16-year-old preteen teenager, they're doing something with their time.
Right.
They say, well, I have ADHD. or I have bipolar disorder, or I have this, or I have that. Yeah, I understand that, but you're doing something with your time and you're making a conscious choice. You're choosing that for some reason.
Right.
And, it's not, like Flip Wilson used to say, the devil made me do it. No, you're making a conscious decision. That's what I like about William Glasser. He said, I don't care. You're still making a decision.
Right.
This is a conscious decision. And so, but your decision should be based on your values.
Right.
Okay. And I like that idea. Okay?
And if we break it down, that's really what we do,
That's right.
When a person when a teenager isn't doing their homework and because they're playing video games, it's not because they have ADHD, it's because their video games are more valuable of higher value to them than their homework.
Right.
And so, shifting that idea so that we become our value, that we start to live our life through our values, not our diagnosis, is really important.
Right. And I think that's a huge shift that I'm going to spend more of my clinical time talking about. Okay.
Yeah.
Sort of an expansion of Glasser and Alfie Cohen and others who say, these are decisions that you make.
Right.
And the second one is how we structure our time. And Ayal uses the word time boxing. And I have to confess that this is something I'm going to have to read a little bit more about because I'm having a hard time figuring out exactly how I want to do this. The ADHD coach said that this was a game changer for her, this idea of time boxing, because for people with ADHD, everything is equally important. And she's absolutely right about that. I mean, they're just clutter, okay? And that's why people with ADHD don't do well with to-do lists, because they'll have a list of 25 items, they get overwhelmed, and then they go do what is comforting to them, whether it's video games or eating or drinking or whatever they do. So a to-do list overwhelms, but instead, they talk about using these time boxes. And from what I understand, a time box is simply a period of time that you're going to use, that you're going to devote to a particular activity.
Right. Yeah. And I actually use this. I've never referred to it as a time box, but I use this strategy a lot of times with kids that have ADHD and their parents. And and I think that you've used something similar where you say, okay, let's set up a time specific for homework. Okay. So nothing else can happen during this time frame. And it's always a battle initially with kids because you say, okay, let's set up this 30-minute time period from 4 o'clock to 4:30 where you're just doing homework. You're not playing video games during that time. You're not going outside during that time. It's just homework time. And invariably the question is, well, what if I finish in less than 30 minutes? Then I should be done, right? And parents will oftentimes say, oh yeah, then if you're finished, then you can go on. That just means you're going to rush through it. No, it doesn't matter how long it takes you to do anything. Using these terms, this time box, this box of time, 30 minutes, is solely dedicated to doing homework. So if you finish your math early, then that means you read the rest of the time, or it means you review this work for the rest of the time. But it's dedicating this time to a specific value. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier, that you have to be able to identify what those values are.
Right.
But you identify specific blocks of time specifically for them.
Right. Yeah. There's no thing I'm finishing early. I finished my homework early. No, the time box turns values into time. That's what you're talking about, is that this 30 minutes remains in place.
Right.
It just, that remains in place. So what you're doing is you're translating your value into a specific time period.
Right.
Okay. And that's what people with ADHD need. And then the third thing is you have to know what activates your brain. And this is sort of that idea of your internal triggers. Okay. The problem with people with ADHD is their brains are fueled by their interests. Their interests change from day to day, moment to moment, and they're flitting from thing to thing based on their interest. What people with ADHD, I think most of us need to learn how to do is what kind of a commitment will work for you.
Right.
What is your commitment? I call it commitment central. Okay, where's your commitment center? Is it something about yourself? Some people say, well, if I lose 10 pounds, I will reward myself with a new outfit. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
For some people that works. Okay.
Right.
Other people, it's I'm going to do this because I have a new person in my life and I want to look nice for her. And so that's going to motivate me. For other people, the doctor says, if you don't get your glucose down, these are going to be the health impairments. Okay. Or is it a support group like Weight Watchers? Okay. Weight Watchers works for a lot of people because you have to go back to the group every week. And you know that, and that sort of keeps you, or AA.
Holds you accountable.
Right. The group holds you accountable. Many people say, well, AA doesn't work for me. Well, that just means that you have to find what does work for you.
Right.
It doesn't work for everybody. So you have to find where commitment central is for you. What activates your brain that will keep you focused. And everybody has that. I mean, even if you have ADHD, again, okay, fine, you have ADHD, but there is something that keeps you committed.
Right. And you know, and that again kind of takes me back to think about sort of an error, I'll say, that many parents will make when working with their kids, whether it's a kid with ADHD or not. You know, we tend to focus on grades as being the focus. Well, they should be motivated because, you know, they want to get into a good college. And to get into a good college, you have to have at least a 4.0 GPA in high school.
Right.
Well, he's only in 8th grade. And if he's only in 8th grade, the likelihood is that none of his classes are counting towards that high school GPA right now anyways.
And they know that.
And they absolutely know that. And even if they didn't, 4 years from now, when they graduate high school, that's an eternity.
Right. When you're that age, 4 years is forever.
Right. I mean, they've only gone through 2/3, for the most part, 2/3 of their learning. So they're not going to be able to think that way. You're not tapping into their commitment center, as you put it. You have to find what's motivating for them, or what's what helps drive them to work towards their interests or their goals or their values, and focus there instead of, you know, something that is motivating to ourselves.
Right. And, you know, I often say to parents that, no, that's your value. Does your child share that value? I mean, I like it when, you know, a parent says, well, I want her to go to NYU, I want her to go to Clemson, or I want her to get into UF. And the child has exactly the same value. And so then both parent and child are working in the same direction. Or you have two partners working for the same goal. That's the ideal, is you have two people working in tandem to accomplish the same goal. But if it's the parent's goal, the kid may or may not be motivated to do it.
Well, and I think that we're kind of pointing out here the difference between a value and a goal.
Exactly.
You know, going to NYU is a goal. Doing well in school and learning, and that's a value. And so those are two different things. One is very specific. One is a sort of a broad concept that should guide our life. You know, if your sole commitment is that you're going to get into NYU, and something happens and NYU closes, and they stop
you.
Okay, now what are you going to do?
That's right.
You know, so your goal should be to you know, be informed and learn and you know, broaden your education, not be the sole focus be so restricted that, you know, something could happen and it not be successful. And then what happens? And then where do you go?
That's right. And so what this comes down to, these two concepts of controlling your attention and not allowing yourself to be distracted by all these distractions. And then also to define your values so that you control your life. So it's really control your attention and identify your values. Okay. So attention and values. So to summarize, what I like about this concept of indistractable is, first of all, it's vocabulary.
Right.
I like the way he phrases things. I like the words he uses. I get it. You know, when he talks about traction instead of distraction, I understand that. Okay, so I like that.
Right.
The second thing I like about it is that it's a process. It's, you
Right.
know, it's you know, like he said in the book and in the article that indistractable doesn't mean you don't have distractions. You're going to have distractions, but now you have a way of managing them.
Right. And with that in mind, it's a set of skills
right
that you can hone and improve upon.
right
And the more that you improve on those skills, the more that we improve with our ability to focus and attend.
That's right. Yeah, it's like anything else. In fact, the ADHD coach said that when she started, she was talking about time boxing, and she said when she first started time boxing, I think she set aside 2 times during the day to do something that was important to her, and so she blocked out those 2 times. And she said over time she blocked more and more things and she said, and now there's only a couple of white spaces in her weekly calendar. She has learned and developed that skill. So you start small and you build and you learn how to use these things and get better and better at it as you learn how to use them.
Absolutely.
Right.
There's also a major component of it that is rooted in mindfulness, you know,
Right.
just being aware of what you're doing and where you're doing it and how you're doing it and when you're doing it, and just being mindful of right now.
Yeah, that's the other thing that I liked about it, is that it ties in this whole concept of mindfulness, of being mindful of what you're doing, and especially with values, you know, that you spend time thinking about, you know, what's really important to you. I think of a young man I've been seeing for a long time, and he has pretty significant ADHD, and it has affected his life. But he needs to identify his values. I mean, he still has values. There are things that are important to him, but he's not always pursuing his values. He spends a lot of time being distracted. You know?
Absolutely.
So even he has values. I know that because I've known him.
Well, in that sense, you know, this when you pull some of those strategies that really make sense, you know, like you mentioned time boxing again just a moment ago, and the command central that we talked about a few minutes ago.
Right.
When you pull all those pieces together and you tie that into your values, the goal then is to give you agency. It puts you in charge of what you're doing in your life.
That's
Instead of being defined again by your disability or your diagnosis, you are defining yourself intentionally. You're defining yourself in a way that you want to be defined through your values and your goals, and that is a massive difference.
You know, I was reading an article the other day, and sadly, unfortunately, it was one of those things that I didn't keep, but it was interesting. And it was written by a psychiatrist who said that, you know, what we call mental illness may not really be a chemical imbalance. It may just be you're just not satisfied with your life. Okay. That you know, and it's just part of the human condition. And that sort of resonated. And I thought, yeah, that's true in a way, because many people we see don't have a brain-based problem. Okay, they're just not happy with their lives. William Glasser made a career talking about that. He said, you're unhappy because you're not living the life that you really should be living, and you're making choices that aren't consistent with your values.
Right.
And what this does, what Indistractable does, is it gives you a process you can use to bring those things closer together. So I think it's consonant with this idea that maybe you don't have a mental illness, maybe you just don't like the way you're living, the life that you're living and creating for yourself.
Absolutely. And again, in this sense, you know, the idea presented here, gives you agency so that you can, you know, get closer to the life that you want to live or that you should be living. So
right. Yep, get
All right.
traction instead of distraction.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
I never
I think
thought of that.
I think that's it for today. There's a link to the article in the show notes.
Mhm.
You can read more about it, and they're near Nair has IL, sorry,
Yep.
near IL. He has some YouTube videos. He has his own podcast and stuff out there, so you can check that out and learn more about his stuff. It seems pretty good so far from what we've seen.
Right. Yeah, I like the idea. It's something that I think is easy to translate into practice, but also personally, I'm going to be able to use some of these things, and certainly I'll be able to use them with some of the youngsters that I see.
Absolutely.
And the
All right.
teenagers in particular.
All right. Well,
Okay.
That's it for today. Until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, and forget to be afraid.